Hi, welcome to Second Earth Alternative. This is your host, Felipe Osorio. Once again, we will be broadcasting voice only, but don't let that dissuade you because we will have a landmark episode. Now, if you listen carefully to the information I'm about to provide, I believe there's a good chance you may never see the world the same again. Now, jumping right into the episode, I wanted to ask, are reptilian shapeshifters a true phenomenon? Now, the reason for me just bursting forward with this question is because I think it's something that our society desperately needs to address. So, let's just ask it, as bluntly and forward as we can, and with no excuses. Are reptilians for real? And if you think not, why do humans have an incessant obsession with such a phenomenon? Now, this question doesn't embarrass me because it actually hits at the very heart of what initiated me with the subject of UFOs. To be frank, I didn't really believe in UFOs when I graduated college with honors, also being one of the few undergraduates that was allowed to work as a research assistant at the UC Santa Barbara Social Psychology Lab. Upon graduating, I felt that I was halted to an academic dead stop simply because what I thought I knew didn't quite match with what I was beginning to learn about ufology. Prime example, UFOs are a figment of social imagination, a misappropriation need for storytelling. Well, at least that's according to some psychologists. That's what we learned. And I never really cared to look deeper into the evidence at the time. What they taught us kind of makes sense, but upon graduating, having some time to actually look into the topic more closely, I started understanding that this phenomenon is incredibly detailed and expansive in breadth. Not to mention seeing case after case that were completely compelling and to the same degree unexplainable. I have to say I was definitely taken back. I began to realize that there was an entire world that existed where my purely Simon Says academic mind was preventing me from seeing. You see, the reason why I mentioned this story is because of the trigger. The trigger meaning what set me off on this journey towards believing that aliens exist and have visited Earth, and that our government or private sectors associated with it are complicit in this knowledge. You see, all of this came from reptilians and not from the UFO cases themselves. Yes, it seems hard to believe, but what made me finally believe that UFOs are real was the knowledge I gained about reptilians in our cultural history and not the former. And this is what frustrates me so much about this topic. Whereas most people must first believe in UFOs to possibly believe in reptilian occupants, I had a reverse direction of understanding. You see, set on an academic life path, what inspired me to look further into the subject wasn't the UFO accounts themselves. Initially, it was really the independent confirmations that I was getting regarding the reptilian beings and their presence in nearly all world cultures to date. I remember when it hit me. It was like a flash memory, like I literally could not stop crying for hours. It was one of the first times that I noticed what true knowledge can do to a grown man. You see, what I was looking at was the often forgotten idea that every culture in the world has a, let's say, prototype dragon in their culture. Now, I used to play a game where I would ask people to try to name a culture that didn't have a dragon, and I still have yet to be stumped by this question. Even the Eskimos had a dragon in their mythology, so what gives? I mean, there has to be something there, right? Now, coming from an upbringing of a theoretical physicist father, I can say using the Old Testament as a source is usually not my first choice. Nonetheless, I felt this quote from Revelations 13 to be incredibly relevant. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs, it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. Now, two things that absolutely shocked me is, one, the Old Testament does a piss poor job at differentiating a dragon and the devil and possibly phenomenon like fire in the sky. So let's not forget about Ezekiel, who also mentioned in the Old Testament, who saw a spinning disc in the skies. In other words, UFOs, dragons, and demons may be part of the same phenomenon, even according to the Bible. Secondly, I never actually knew that when referring to the number 666, the mark of the man, that Revelations literally states, calculate the number of the beast. Which, if you saw in the previous episode we did precisely that. So why don't we just listen into what we calculated regarding the number 666. But what I did is, if you add the sine of 666 degrees plus the cosine of 6 times 6 times 6, what do you think that equals? Well, it says here equals the negative 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2. Now, if you put all of that into an actual decimal number, this is what you get. Now, for those who may not recognize this number, let me show you what this number is real quick. That is literally the negation, the negative version of the golden ratio. What? So you take just the numbers 666 and applying this in a simple cosine sine function, you can get the negative golden ratio with that number? And I was like so stunned when I found out about this that I decided to see, hey, what would happen if I just switched the numbers, right? So let's go back to the sine of 600 and let's just switch this. So instead of putting sine, let's put cosine here. And here, instead of cosine, let's put sine. And let's see what we get. The answer is 0. Okay, I swear to God, no pun intended. After seeing this, it was tough to look at the Bible the same, because it became clear to me that at least some of the scriptures had calculatable knowledge that was embedded in it. So proceeding further with this concept, I couldn't come to grips why every single culture in the world and religion alike seemed to reference this 666 beast, or a dragon prototype deity that is often depicted in very similar ways. For example, continents apart, there exists a culture called the Dogon people. Now, they have been relatively isolated since the time of the Sumerians, and their gods are said to be frog-faced amphibian deities from the Sirius star system. Now, similarly, the Egyptians had Isis, a reptilian-looking god from the Sirius star system. What's more, whereas the Hopi Indians, with identical engineering constructions of their dwellings as the Dogon people, and who had advanced astronomical and mathematical knowledge, also believed in a deity that brought them knowledge that they called Kachinas, which were lizard-faced people. And the Dogons actually believed that the first primordial human beings had turned into a snake. So the question I have is, who taught the Dogon tribe the stories of Adam and Eve, where in some versions, Lilith, the very first creature of the Garden of Eden, is a talking serpent? She's the one who's offered to Adam. So if that's not enough, I also stumbled upon this eerie connection that the Hopi dialect for ants is Anu, whereas their word for friend is Naki, meaning Anunnaki literally in Hopi language translates to ant friend, whereas in the Sumerian language, Anunnaki means sky gods. The Hopi Indians also had a story that these ant people helped them weather a catastrophic event by sheltering underground, possibly during a comet strike around 12,900 years ago, which contributed to the last mini ice age. If that's not enough, get this, the Dogon word for their amphibian creator god is Nomo. Whereas in Sumerian mythology, there's a similar creator god concept, but it's termed Nama or Namu, depending on the sex. So what's great about language is that it can often be used as a diagnostic tool to understand the evolution of cultures. And one theme that always comes back from culture after culture is the idea of a sky god and dragons giving us humanity knowledge. Guys and gals, I'm gonna say right now, we may have just stumbled on the most important information ever kept from human history, and it's completely documented in all our ancient manuscripts if we understand how to properly interpret it. Now, this information that I began to encounter and verify with confidence of somebody who couldn't stop having independent confirmations happening even if I tried, that's the same information that prompted psychologist Carl Jung to come out with his snake archetype symbolism theory. What Carl Jung was effectively doing when he came out with the snake symbol archetype theory, which Freud, his mentor, never actually came to agreements with, this was because he couldn't understand why every culture in the world has a dragon. Carl Jung, being a prominent psychologist and Sigmund Freud's protege, attempted to understand this incongruence with what he knew best, psychology. So he invented an idea that humans created dragons in their cultures because we all fear snakes from a distant primal monkey-like beginning, which via evolutionary forces etched itself like a universal language into our brains. Okay, look, it's a fancy idea, and parts of it, like humans inherently fearing snakes, could be true, but it does very little to explain away the actual evidence that Carl Jung himself couldn't come to terms with. In fairness, one idea that we have gained as a culture that betters our understanding that Carl Jung did not have is that when we look up in the skies and we see those little white dots, the stars in this big vast black sky, well, at least a quarter of those stars has a potential Earth-like planet in a habitable zone. Also, at the time, we had never gone to places like the moon or Mars, so these concepts of humans being able to lift themselves off of Earth and go to other worlds, it was practically non-existent at the time that Carl Jung had his theories. The ridiculous coincidence of every culture in the world discussing dragons may not be purely a mental construct. Perhaps it's the physical reality of a dragon-looking, meaning reptilian-looking species coming to Earth that may be the universal factor that inspired multiple cultures simultaneously. And according to Occam's razor, wouldn't an explanation that roots itself to a physical reality not be a simpler explanation than one that has to be rooted to a made-up mental construct akin to a new language? Okay, so what's my evidence? Well, I say this. If Carl Jung was right about his theory, then snakes would be the primary symbol of every culture. But that's not the case. You see, it's the dragon that is the main symbol. And what struck me as painfully missing in Carl's interpretation was his lack of attentiveness to the specificity of the legends themselves that were occurring with disparate cultures with no previous affiliation to one another. So basically, Jung never addressed, outside of the snake symbolism, why there is so much specificity to these cultures, describing dragons similarly continents apart. Another example, the idea that a dragon is symbolized with a goat, a lion, a serpent, and an owl or an ego, it's a very specific occurring phenomenon that happens with multiple cultures. For example, the Dogon tribe often uses a goat's mask to represent their god in addition to wings. And remember the quote we just mentioned from Revelations? It had true horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. And aside from secret society deities like Baphomet also utilizing these goat symbols, we also have the Babylonians who depicted their primary deity Ishtar like this. But not just goats or lambs, but also the lion, which the dragon was described in the Old Testament as having the face of a lion, whereas the ancient Mithra school religion from Rome also used the lion wrapped around a snake on top of the world. And the Chinese dragon was iconically known as a lion dragon, and even the Greeks had a fire-breathing chimera with a lion and a goat. But are we inherently afraid of goats? And if you didn't know, one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in the heavens above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth, well, this commandment was instated after Babylonian transition from the Sumerian Empire. In other words, the Sumerians had no rules about how one could depict their deity, whereas the Babylonians did. And how was the same deity depicted before this new law took into place? Take a look. You see, reptilians are not just a figment of our imagination, they are truly a part of human history. So, are reptilians real? Well, to finish my story, it was the reptilians and my understanding of psychology and world history that led me to believe in UFOs. In other words, if I didn't believe that reptilians were real, I would have never believed in UFOs. So yes, I do believe they are real. And I believe the historical evidence, including the specificity of symbols and ideas cross-culturally, is indicative of a specific interaction with a snake-like being and not a mental construct, as Carl Jung puts it, and whose basis would create correlations that are general at best, as opposed to the specificity that we seem to encounter in world mythologies. So I wanted to end this segment by showing a reptilian ship-shifting video.
I'm sorry, I hate to dwell on this, but you definitely said pyramid scheme back then. But I'm sorry, now we're suddenly going to the bank.
And you're gonna walk into the bank and you're gonna deposit your coding bonus. And the lady's gonna say, will that be checking or saving?
So, though I believe in reptilians, I have to admit that this video is not one of the evidence I support when discussing this topic. From personal experience, this looks, it looks pretty scary, right? But as an editor, I can see a rendering artifact when it happens. And this is exactly what's happening with this video. And it happens with many other videos. And let me show you this frame. You can specifically tell from this frame where you see the image split that this is a rendering thing. This is not like some kind of like mystical, like ship-shifting event. So to sum it up, yes, I believe reptilians are real, or at the least was real once in our history. However, that doesn't make me crazy, and it doesn't make me believe in every reptilian ship-shifting supposed evidence. However, there is something else that kind of surprised me regarding this topic. Like David Icke, who claims to have encountered numerous people all around the world who have seen others who supposedly shifts into reptile, well, I too know of two individuals, both at one point very close to me, who apparently saw something similar to one another. And let's be clear, I'm talking two people, not one, who both mentioned that while being sexually assaulted, that they saw their attacker distinctly turn into a reptilian creature. Both women were very careful to describe the distinctiveness of the shift, meaning to them it was as clear as daylight when it happened. So I actually trust both of them, and none of these women were aware of each other, let alone of their personal accounts when they explained to me the story. So what the fuck? Psychologists are going to be quick to jump on the idea that these women were experiencing something traumatic that forced their brains to hallucinate an image to make the attack more easy to deal with. That's the basis of dissociative identity disorder, or multiple personality disorder. So like everything else discussed in this episode, I think the answer, though it could be a form of hallucination, may not be so simple given everything else we have come to learn about the history of reptilians. So on the next episode, I'm thinking of attempting to see if there is any real evidence of reptilians. So if you have a story or something incredible that you wanted to share with this channel, please don't hesitate to email me at eafiles.contact@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to this very important topic that perhaps has world-defining implications. This is Felipe Osorio, signing out.